Harriet Cole said it to herself first, which was where she said most things that mattered, alone in the kitchen after the children were in bed, while she was doing the accounts for the month, and finding the month shorter than the money it required. She said it the way you say a fact you have decided to accept. I am a woman with 3 children, and a broken fence, and a farm that is managing, and not doing better than that. And no man in his right mind is going to ride up this road and find that worth staying for. She said it, and believed it, and went back to the accounts, and closed them, and went to bed. She had been a widow for 2 years. The farm was 80 acres in the Crane Creek Valley, hers outright, paid for in the years before Marcus had died, by the combination of their work and a small inheritance from his mother that had arrived at exactly the right time. The farm was good land. Marcus had known it was good land, and she had known it was good land, and the land itself had been demonstrating it every season. The problem was not the land, the problem was the fence on the south line, which had been going wrong for 3 years, and had been going wrong faster since Marcus died, and which she had not been able to fix, because fixing it correctly required 2 people, and she had not had a second person available with the relevant combination of time and competence. She had 2 hands willing enough. Tom was 14, and had been doing the work of a man for a year and a half, and deserved better than what the situation required of him. But 2 hands and a 14-year-old were not the same as 2 people who each knew what they were doing, and the fence knew the difference, and was demonstrating it by failing in the sections she least wanted it to fail in. She was 38 years old. She had Ruth, who was 11, and had her mother's precision with numbers, and her father's ability to read weather, and she had Tom at 14, who had the physical competence of someone who grew up too fast, and the emotional intelligence to know it had been required of him, and not resent it, mostly. And she had Caleb, who was 7, and had the imaginative interior life of someone who had been making up for the absence of his father by populating the world with excellent substitutes, most of them from the books she read to him at night. She had 3 children and 80 acres, and a south line fence that was failing, and the accounts that told her that a hired man was not in this year's budget, and possibly not in next year's either. She went to the Crane Creek Hardware on a Thursday in March for fence staples and wire stretchers, and came out to find a wagon parked beside hers that had not been there when she went in, loaded with lumber and hardware, in the particular order of someone who had made this kind of run many times, and had a system for it. The man loading the last of it looked up when she came out. He was perhaps 40, not especially tall, with the kind of physical presence that came from doing regular hard work for long enough that the body had arranged itself accordingly and stopped calling attention to it. He had a specific quality of stillness when he stopped moving, the kind that said the stillness was not rest, but attention redirected. He said good afternoon. She said the same. She put her staples and wire stretchers in the wagon, and he finished loading his, and they drove out of the Crane Creek Main Street in the same direction, which was east, because the farms in this part of the valley were mostly east of town, and she arrived at her gate before he arrived at his, because he went a mile further down the valley road and turned at the old Hendricks place, which she had heard had been sold in February to someone from the north. She thought about this on the walk from the gate to the house, and filed it under information to be confirmed later, and went to make supper. His name was William Tate, and she confirmed it at the church the following Sunday, where he was sitting 2 rows ahead of her, and introduced himself to the minister after the service, with the directness of a man who has decided to be part of a community and is doing it without ceremony. He shook hands with the people near him, and she watched him do it from across the vestibule, and noted the quality of the handshake, which was the kind that paid attention to what it was shaking, rather than performing the act of shaking. He did not make a production of introducing himself. He simply did it, the same way he apparently did most things. He saw her looking, and nodded. She nodded back, and took the children out to the wagon. Ruth said, "Who was that?" Harriet said, "The new man at the Hendricks place." Tom said he had heard the Hendricks place had a drainage problem on the east section. Harriet said she had heard the same. She had also heard the previous owner had let the south pasture go 2 seasons before selling, which was the kind of information that told you something about a man who bought a place like that. Either he hadn't looked carefully, or he had looked and believed he could set it right, and these were very different kinds of buyers. Caleb said the new man had a nice hat. Nobody commented on this. The south fence let itself go further in April, which was what the south fence did when the frost came out and the posts shifted, and she was at the failing section on a Wednesday morning when she heard a truck on the valley road and then on her lane. Tom was at school. Ruth was at school. Caleb was at school. She was alone at the fence, with the wire loose, and the post at a wrong angle, and the whole section needing what it had been needing for 2 seasons. She turned. The man from the hardware, William Tate, had parked at the lane end and was walking toward her. He said good morning. She said good morning. He said he had seen the fence from the road. She said it had been going this way for a while. He said he could see that. He looked at the section without saying anything about it for a moment, which was the correct response, because a man who immediately tells a woman what is wrong with her fence, before she has indicated she wants to hear it, is the wrong kind of man. Then he said, "I could help you with this if you wanted." She looked at him. He said he had the tools and a morning, and the fence needed 2 people to do it right, and he was one of them if she wanted the other. She looked at the fence and then at him. She said, "What do you want for it?" He said, "I'd like to know my neighbor." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "The stretcher is in the barn." He went to get it, and she went to get the post maul, and they spent the morning on the south fence, and the fence section came right, and they did 2 more sections. She had been watching while they were at it, and at noon she made lunch, and they ate at the kitchen table, and neither of them made anything more of the morning than a morning of fence work, which it had been, and she was glad of that. He thanked her for the lunch and drove back to the Hendricks place, and she watched him go and then went back to the fence to finish what they had started in the afternoon. The children came home at 4, and Tom looked at the south fence from the gate and looked at his mother and said, "That's been done right." She said it had. Tom said, "Who?" She said, "The new man at the Hendricks place came by." Tom looked at the fence a while longer. He was 14, and he had been doing the work of a man for a year and a half, and he knew fence work the way he knew most things, which was from necessity and observation, and he could read the difference between fence work done quickly and fence work done correctly. He said, "Do we owe him anything?" She said she would figure that out. Tom said, "Good fence work." She said yes. He went to do the afternoon chores without further comment, which from Tom was its own kind of endorsement, and she noted it and did not examine it directly. Ruth came to the fence that evening with her arithmetic, which she sometimes did when she was working through something that needed ambient outdoor space to settle, and she looked at the repaired section and looked at Harriet and said, "He did the corner posts the right way." Harriet said she had noticed that. Ruth said, "Most people don't bother with the corners." Harriet said, "Most people didn't have to live with the corners after." Ruth went back to her arithmetic. She was 11, and she had her father's ability to read structural things, fences, accounts, a room's social temperature, with the same precise eye, and her comment about the corners was accurate observation and also something more than that, and Harriet received both parts of it. Caleb asked at supper who the man in the truck was, and Harriet said, "A neighbor who had helped with the fence." And Caleb asked if he was going to come back, and Harriet said she didn't know, and Caleb said he hoped so, because the fence had been broken since forever, and she set down her fork and looked at him, and he said, "No offense, Mama, it just had." Tom looked at his plate. Ruth looked at her arithmetic, which she had brought to supper. Harriet picked up her fork. She said, "I know, Caleb." He nodded seriously and went back to his food. The spring arranged itself around the farm. William Tate was at the church each Sunday, and he greeted her with the consistency of a man who has decided to know a person and is proceeding accordingly. And she received the greeting with the consistency of a woman who has noticed the same. He had not made anything of the fence morning, in terms of what it meant or might mean. He had done the fence and eaten lunch and left, and this had been the right thing to do, and she had been relieved by it in the way you are relieved by someone who reads a situation correctly, which was a particular kind of relief. He came by in May about a drainage question on the Creek Road, which she answered from 5 years of watching it, and he stayed 20 minutes and left without pressing the conversation past what it had been. He came in June to see if she had any knowledge of the previous well at the Hendricks place, which she did, from something Marcus had mentioned, and she told him, and he thanked her and left. Ruth had been at the kitchen table both times, and afterward said, without looking up from whatever she was doing, "He asks good questions." Harriet said he did. Ruth said, "He listens to the answers." Harriet said she had noticed. Ruth said, "Dad used to say you could tell everything you needed to know about a person by whether they listened to the first answer or were already preparing the second question while you were talking." Harriet was quiet for a moment. She said, "Your father was right about that." Ruth went back to what she was doing, and Harriet went back to what she was doing, and Marcus was in the room the way he was sometimes in the room, present without being painful, and they both knew it was there. In July, a woman named Eleanor Finch, who lived on the north side of the valley, came to the farm with a basket of something from her garden, and the organized concern of a woman who has decided a situation requires her attention. She said she hoped Harriet was being careful, and that people were noticing the Tate man coming by, and that a woman in Harriet's position needed to think about what her children were seeing and what the valley was thinking. She said children need stability, and she said it the way people said things that were actually about something else. Harriet put the kettle on. She said her children had stability, thank you, and that the Tate man had helped with the fence in April and answered a couple of questions since, and that she was certain Eleanor's concern was genuine, and she was equally certain the situation was in hand. Eleanor looked at the kitchen. She said she just wanted Harriet to know that people were talking. Harriet poured the tea. She said she would keep that in mind. She said it without heat and without dismissal, and Eleanor, who was not a foolish woman, understood both the welcome and the limit, and drank her tea, and said she was glad the farm was doing well, and left. Tom was at the far end of the kitchen. He had heard all of it. He was 14, and he had been carrying the weight of the farm's man-shaped absence for 2 years, without complaint and without losing track of what he was, which was a boy who deserved to be a boy, and was instead doing what the situation required. And he had opinions about people who suggested his mother should not avail herself of competent help from a decent neighbor. He looked at his mother. She looked at him. He said, "The fence did need fixing, Mama." She said she knew. He went back to his work. It was a Saturday in August when it shifted. She had been at the back field and came in at noon to find William Tate at the kitchen table with Caleb, who had apparently encountered him at the gate and escorted him in for reasons Caleb considered self-evident. William looked up when she came in, with the expression of a man who has been placed in a position he did not engineer and is not going to pretend is something other than what it is. He said Caleb had been explaining the story about the wolf and the 2 brothers, which Harriet had been reading to him, and that he had some opinions about whether the older brother had made the right decision in the 3rd chapter. Harriet looked at Caleb. Caleb said they had been waiting for her to settle the question because she had the book. She said they could discuss it at supper if William wanted to stay, which she said, the way you say something, when you have decided it, is a reasonable thing to say before you have finished deciding whether you are certain. William said he would stay. Caleb went to set an extra plate with the satisfaction of someone who has brought about an outcome he intended. Tom came in from the yard and saw William at the table and looked at his mother, and she said, "William is staying for supper." Tom looked at William. William said he had been recruited by Caleb for a literary discussion. Tom said, "About the Wolf book." William said yes. Tom sat down at the table. He said, "The older brother made a mistake in chapter 3. William said he agreed. Tom said, "Mama thinks he had no choice." They both looked at her. She said she was getting supper, and the question would keep. They had supper and settled the older brother's moral situation to no one's complete satisfaction. And she walked William to his truck afterward, and they stood in the late August evening, with the farm quiet behind them, and the valley doing what it did in August, which was hold the warmth longer than you expected it to. She said, you didn't have to stay. He said, Caleb had strong opinions about the book. She said Caleb had strong opinions about most things. He said he had noticed. He looked at the farm, the way he had looked at the south fence in April, with the attention of someone reading what is there rather than deciding what should be. He said, I came by in April because the fence needed fixing, and I had a morning, and it was the neighborly thing. He said, I came back in May and June because I had questions, and you had answers. He said, I kept coming by because it stopped being about the fence and the questions. He looked at her. He said, I have no plan for how to say this properly, so I will say it plainly. I would like to come by because I want to, and I would like that to be the arrangement. And I understand the arrangement has 3 parts to it, who are 8 and 11 and 14, and I am asking to be considered by all 4 of you, and I will take whatever time that requires. She looked at the farm and then at him. She said, you know what you're asking. He said, I think I do. She said, the fence is the easiest part. He said, I know that too. She said, Caleb will have opinions. He said he had already determined that. She held it for a moment. Then she said, come for supper next Saturday, and we'll see. He said that was fair. He drove out, and she went back inside, and Caleb was still at the kitchen table with his book, and looked up and said, is he coming back? She said next Saturday. Caleb nodded with the manner of a person who expected this outcome, and went back to his book. The Saturdays became the arrangement, and then more than Saturdays, and by the time October came, William Tate was at the table, with the regularity of someone who has found his place in a room and settled into it, and Tom had stopped watching him, with the careful attention of a boy, deciding whether a man is trustworthy, and had started talking to him the way you talk to a person you have decided is present for the right reasons. And Ruth had stopped being formally polite and started being herself, which was the higher honor of the two, and which William received without requiring it to be noted. In November, on a quiet evening after Caleb was in bed and Tom and Ruth had gone to their rooms, William was at the kitchen table, and Harriet was at the accounts, and he said he had something to say. She set down the pen. He said, I came to the Crane Creek Valley because I needed a different place than the one I had been in, and I bought the Hendricks place because the land was right, and I came down the valley road on a Wednesday in April and saw a fence that needed 2 people. He said, I have been here 8 months, and I know what I am asking, and I am asking it. He said, I have a farm, and the farm has room, and I would like all 4 of you in it, permanently, as my wife and her children, who would be mine as far as I was able to make them, if that was what she would want. She looked at the account book and the pen, and the kitchen window, and the farm outside it, and she thought about a woman with 3 children, and a broken fence, and a farm that was managing and not doing better than that. And she thought about a man who had said, show me the fence, and had come in the morning with the stretcher and the post maul, and had stayed through to the corner posts. She said yes, that was what she wanted. He crossed the kitchen, and she stood up, and he took her hands, and she let him. And neither of them said anything further that evening, because there was nothing further that needed saying. They married in February. Tom stood with William at the front of the church, with the expression of a boy who has decided this is the right thing and is not going to perform anything about it. Ruth sat in the front row and watched the ceremony with the precision of someone who has been deciding about this for 8 months and has arrived at a settled verdict. Caleb had been designated ring-bearer, which he managed with a solemn competence that surprised everyone except Harriet, who had known what Caleb was capable of when the occasion merited it. He had also decided, 3 months prior, to call William by a name other than William, and after a period of consideration had arrived at a name that was his own construction and that everyone had simply accepted because Caleb had said it was right, and Caleb was generally right about these things. The south fence stood through the 2nd winter, and the 3rd, the corner posts set the way they had been set in April, by 2 people who knew what they were doing. Tom walked the south fence every spring in the second and third year and reported its condition to Harriet, the way he reported the condition of everything he had been responsible for, which was accurately and without softening the news. The news on the south fence was consistently good, which was its own kind of tribute to the April morning when it had been set right. In the fourth year, Tom took on the south fence himself as part of the farm work he had claimed by then, and he set his posts the same way, which was the way William had shown him, which was the way Marcus had known Tom was going to need to know someday, and which Marcus had started teaching him before he died, and which William had finished teaching him without making anything of the finishing, because he understood what it was to complete what someone else had started, and he handled it with the care it deserved. The farm ran the way good farms run when they are properly resourced and correctly managed and have enough people in them, which was not perfectly and not without difficulty, but with the particular competence that comes from knowing what you are doing and doing it with someone who knows what they are doing alongside you, and that was enough. And it was more than managing, which was what Harriet had quietly wanted for 2 years before she had stopped counting the things she lacked and started building the things she had. And that was the story of Harriet, who said no man wanted a woman with 3 children and a broken fence, and found out what happened when you let someone look at the fence before deciding. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this one. Thank you.